Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well, doing well. It's early in the day.
Early in the day, yeah.
And, you know, we find some good stuff. We're going to start off with a good guy, though.
A good guy,
today, saying the right things. But he's one of few, you know, in the House. I think we have a couple in the Senate.
Yeah.
There's a few there. That's the whole problem, is people that will really stick to their guns and do what they say they're doing, and what they're doing is the right thing to do. But we want to talk a little bit about Thomas Massie,
yes,
who's from Kentucky. And we also want to recognize Bob Wenzel, who has a website, Target Liberty,
yeah,
and he also has an educational site. He's a guy worth following. As a matter of fact, when we don't find stuff and we're not up to speed, we just go look at Bob's site,
yeah,
and we find out. So he had this up. He found a tweet, you know, by Thomas. And anytime you see anything by Thomas Massie, it's worth reading and listening to, because he's one of the few you can trust. We don't have to go and fact check Thomas Massie. But anyway, they wanted to talk about the budget. This Massie, you know, did a blog tweet on the budget. A lot of people, the stimulus package. A lot of people do that. You know, everybody knows. You know, it's $1.92 trillion additional to the three or four before. It's hard to keep up with it. And you know, and the conservatives are doing a good job. But you know what I think of when I hear somebody come up with a good thing and say, well, this is really bad and it's really stupid, and they get their attention. Why in the world is that in there? We need to strike that. And I got to thinking about, you know, a package, especially like this, because even though this might apply to the whole budget, and that is, why don't you start with striking the whole thing? Yeah, really. I mean, how much in there is going to fit into the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, and the principles of liberty and independence and this sort of thing? Very, very little. But anyway, Thomas points out here that there was $1 billion there, and as I seriously joke, seriously say, you know, someday that $1 billion might add up to a lot of money, you know, for some people, but it's thrown around. So what's one puny $1 billion and $1.9 trillion plus all the other stuff? It's just sort of peanuts, except when you think about 1/2 of our population whose standard of living is going down sharply, yes, and nobody's hardly even talking about that. So the $1 billion is designated for a little bit of education. Sometimes we refer to it as propaganda, but who would ever believe that governments would do propaganda? Propaganda, this is a secret. It's a polite word for lying, yeah, because we can't call people liars. That's a little bit too strong. They're confused and all this. It's just a little bit of propaganda, building a case for their spending. So this money is designated for vaccine confidence activities. Well, I thought everybody was lined up a mile long. Every city they're pounding, and the problem with shortages, and they can't get enough. And all of a sudden, we've reported on this, certain groups, people who work there, military people, there's segments that just seem to have a different attitude and more questions raised than the average person. And they say, well, we don't want this, so this is what the government has to do. If the people don't want all the wonderful things the government is doing for them, then we have to help it along. And, you know, that's sort of the way welfare works. I remember a little story as when I was delivering babies. We would deliver a baby, and a lot of times they were just walk-ins and they had no doctor and all. Mm-hmm. So the social workers immediately came and signed them up for a welfare program. You know, oh, well, we can get you free this and free this. And as I visited with people how it worked, they would go to one agency and they would handle and sign them up, and then they say, well, now you just go, and they'd recommend the next one. So they were all protecting their jobs. You know, I don't know how much help, but this is sort of in that category. The government has to build confidence in vaccines. I don't remember anything like that with the polio vaccine.
Yeah, people lined up.
Because there was, I don't think there were millions of people who just say, we're a little bit skittish about this. But there's been now more education about the pros and cons of vaccines, and it's almost like very serious affront to government and verging on committing a crime if you would tell people that they better be objective about this. Study it and read both sides of the pluses and minuses on vaccine. That's getting awfully risky conversation. But anyway, Thomas points this out. $1 billion for this, and I predict ain't going to change much at all.
Yeah. Well, let's put up the tweet so we can look at it. He actually replied to his own tweet. If we can put that first one up. The first thing he writes, and Dr. Paul, I know you say you can't call people liars, but guess what? Thomas Massie did. He said the CDC willfully lies about data regarding effectiveness of the vaccine, yet Congress is going to give them $1 billion to strengthen vaccine confidence in the United States. He said today's $2 trillion bill includes $1 billion for vaccine confidence activities, and then he replies to his own tweet saying, yeah, vaccines are so safe and effective, the government is going to spend $1 billion convincing people they're safe and effective. And it makes a good point because, first of all, I know you, and I think probably millions of Americans resent the government picking our pockets and using that money to propagandize us into accepting government policies. That seems like something you'd expect in a totalitarian regime. But the other thing that it does is that it skews the debate. It skews what should be an important debate. And your position has always been, hey, if you want a vaccine, take a vaccine. It's a good idea to get educated on the pros and cons, because like everything in life, there are pros and cons. But we're not sitting here saying, don't you dare get near it. But what happens when you take $1 billion and throw it down on one side, which is the CDC side, which, as Thomas Massie points out, is a little bit less than honest and forthcoming in its data. If you put it all on that side, then the other side of the debate suffers, doesn't have the access, and in fact gets kicked off of social media and is denied any place in the public sphere. So the idea that you can't really have a conversation when you take $1 billion and put it on one side of the scale and the other side doesn't. So that's a real problem, and I really hats off to Thomas Massie for pointing this out. I think it's pretty disgusting.
To me, this is a direct attack on liberty. Voluntarism, people making their own choices, self-reliance, which is something that Americans prided themselves in at one time. But no, this is saying that the American people are stupid. They don't know what to do. They don't know whether they don't have the right to reject or accept or do what they want. They don't trust liberty, and so the money is literally so everything the government spends, I think, is a challenge to liberty. I mean, there's not much there, even though I think that's the sole purpose of government, is to protect our liberties for us to solve our problems. But here, this is very direct. But I would predict that it's a lot more than $1 billion in this bill here that goes to this purpose of taking power and privileges away from the people, and that they need Fauci. Check with Fauci. What do we have to know what Fauci says, because and there's still a lot of people that way. You can understand, why the major progressive stations are doing it. They know exactly what they're doing. They have an agenda, but it's pretty amazing how many people who would not want to be considered, progressive, leftist, socialist, type of thing. But they have accomplished one thing that the chief person to pass out the propaganda is Fauci. Yeah. Fauci's the litmus test. But I would say a little bit less than it was 6 months ago.
Yeah, I think so. That's for sure. Well, as long as we're on the topic of Massie, we can't avoid putting up this other tweet that he put out there. He's been on fire lately, and we always enjoy watching. Here's CNN has a breaking news tweet. The CDC releases guidelines giving limited freedoms to people fully vaccinated against COVID-19. And Thomas Massie replies to it, imagine believing the CDC is a giver of freedoms, and then he's got his head butt. But it's pretty funny when you look at it. The CDC is giving you limited freedoms.
That's really striking.
Yeah,
it's a basic principle.
Wrong.
Where our freedoms come from. They come from the CDC. Yeah. That's a challenge. Somebody writes about that. The CDC cannot provide us our liberties. Nor can the federal government, nor can our public educational system. And that's really where the philosophic challenge is where do our liberties come from and where do our responsibilities come from? And of course, we've been battling that, but people do have a renewal of the spirit of liberty sometimes, but at a later date, when things get so bad, there will be the remnant comes alive again and said, well, you know what, this can be done differently, and it had been done differently, and it's called self-reliance and honesty. But anyway, it's going to continue as long as the people put up with it. And so far, on a few things that's happened here recently, even though things have changed a little bit here in the state, and I remember I'd have to admit I was a little bit more excited about it than you might have been, because you say, wait a minute, we have to wait and read the fine lines of all this. Now, guess what? This whole thing in Texas where Abbott, gave us all this freedom back to us. There's some loopholes there for him to still put up with all this nonsense. And what is this special day today? This was supposed to be a new birth of freedom, today. I don't know. I don't think that is. I hope we just have a new birth of, curiosity of trying to get more people to understand what's really going on and why the concept of liberty and who provides true liberty is thought about and thought through, because that is the issue. And as long as we depend on the Faucis of the world, we're in big trouble.
Yeah, today is an important day because this is the day we're given our independence again from the governor. And he issued a new executive order last week that took effect today on Wednesday. Sold as eliminating the mask mandate and opening everything up 100%. There is some fine print in there that's not super exciting, and unfortunately he extended the COVID state of disaster once again. However, I'm starting to change my tune, Dr. Paul, because when I look out there, when I Google this whole thing, and I look at the people that are absolutely flipping out at him, viciously attacking him for what he's done, I have to admit I feel a tinge of sympathy for him. It did take some courage for him to do the right thing. As we've said before on this show, if he had been courageous from the beginning and been more like DeSantis or Kristi Noem, he would have not had to take all of these slings and arrows for changing his tune. But he didn't display the courage that he should have up front. Nevertheless, we still have to applaud him. Let's look at this next clip, because when you have these people hating on you, you are doing the right thing. Here's CNN. They have a doctor writing, Jonathan Rainier, Greg Abbott's delusional ideas about COVID. Oh, he's delusional. He's mentally ill. However, when you look at this article, what's really delusional, or I would say even just deceptive, is the article itself. And this guy's a doctor, okay? But this is a very deceptive article. It blasts Abbott for allowing stores to open for retail and eliminate stay-at-home policy back in the spring. He says because in November, Texas had the highest number of cases as a nation. So essentially blaming him for opening the stores and letting you go out of your house for this massive increase in November without mentioning A, seasonal flu, and B, hang on a minute, we've had a mask mandate with a very high level of observation since July. So if that mask mandate with 80-90% of the people wearing their masks, then how did we get that huge jump in November? Well, of course, he doesn't talk about that at all. And the other thing, he attacked Abbott for opening bars and restaurants at limited capacity in October, and he said there was a surge in cases in November, of course, the seasonality. But he distorts the CDC report. He says researchers found that mandating masks was associated with a decrease in daily COVID-19 case and death growth rates within 20 days of implementation. In restaurant dining was associated with increase in daily COVID-19 case and death rates. That is deceptive, as we talked about yesterday, because we read the CDC report. And what it said is, yes, it decreased the daily COVID cases by 1% and increase by 1%. Statistically, it is not a significant number. So he didn't include the actual data that the CDC itself told us. Deceptive. If I'm going to fact check the CNN Dr. Paul, I'm going to say pants on fire.
We give the governor a little bit of credit for backing off, and a good mayor somewhere, or a good county commissioner and county judge can use this now and move in that direction. But it's not automatic.
Yeah.
In our own hometown, we don't know exactly what the mayor is going to do. We have a new mayor, but we did hear that the county commissioners are going to maintain the mask program and not back off. So it's one of these things that to me it's like clinging to power.
Yeah.
We complain a lot, and we should, that power should be, the ultimate free society is it resides with the individual. The individual has full responsibility, and the only obligation is to commit no violence. But then it moves up the ladder. You need, then there's a lot of voluntarism. Families and friends and neighbors and neighborhoods can have their own self-government. But then you hear, when it comes to official government, you have city power and county power and state power, and then you have federal power, and you have international government power. It's on and on up the ladder. And generally, when a conservative talks, and I think you can recognize it in their speeches, they're talking about the federal government's immediate regulations that abuse some Republican group of people, and they don't approach it this way. But I think what we're seeing now is this past year, there's some people out there that had power they never had before. I mean, this executive order, the principle of executive orders, it is so distorted. Executive order is maybe precisely carrying out a precise law that was passed. Maybe they provided so much fund for a highway, and he carries it out, and he writes a directive or an order. So that isn't what's going on. All of a sudden, they found that they had all this power, and I think some of them like it, and they're clinging to it, and they don't understand the whole principle. And I think one of my goals is to help them at least think about this, rather than thinking in terms of political power and shrewdness and who endorses what, who raises the most money, and which political party can have one up on the others, and forgetting totally about what it would be like if individual liberty was truly protected, and that violence, most people would understand, well, we agree with you, nobody should steal and hurt other people. But the catch is, can you send the government to do your dirty work for you? And even if it's just in regulation like this, in a way, that's sort of what the CDC is. I mean, they're not an elected government or anything, but we've picked them out. The government, our system has picked them out, even though they've been around a long time. All of a sudden, boy, I wonder if you were trying to weigh and measure how much authority they've had and how much interference they've had in health matters, how much interference they've had in monetary affairs and spending. I mean, it is big, and I call that force and violence, and the kind of thing that wouldn't exist if you lived in a free society.
Yeah, for sure. The thing that's troubling, and going back to how you started talking about, yes, we have our freedom back in Texas theoretically, but it is depressing because Brazoria County, for our non-Texas friends, Brazoria County is not Harris County. This is Ron Paul country. We always had, you had like Kim Jong-un level votes in this county, and then 99.9%. So it's really depressing when you see someone like Judge Sebesta acting like Lena Hidalgo, acting like this horrible Harris County judge who locks everything down. And I'm not saying that he's as bad as her. I can't believe he's as bad as her. However, why is he not following what the governor has said when the governor is doing the right thing? And our local mayor, as you say, a new mayor, but he was on the city council. I think I told you, I spoke before the council once, and they all had their masks on. He could easily follow Abbott's orders. This is a conservative city. He could easily follow what Abbott's intentions are by canceling the executive order of his predecessor and canceling this fake mask mandate that's not a mask mandate. They haven't done it yet, but I hope people around here in this county and the city will put pressure on them. But we're talking about Abbott's enemies, and we can't go without putting up someone who we love to talk about. Let's look at this next clip. our favorite doctor, the expert in epidemiology, Anthony Fauci, he is very upset with Texas. He says, it's a concern. When you start doing things like completely putting aside all public health measures, that's quite risky. We don't want to see another surge, and that's inviting one when you do that. Of course, that's not what Abbott did at all, Dr. Paul. He said, hey, if you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If a business wants to require a mask, require a mask. You know, it's up to you to protect your own health. And that aspect of what he did was the right thing.
Couldn't we check out a few of the special governors who have spoken out in the past, and their record is not exactly clean? I wonder if they have permission to criticize us. Haven't a few people done that? That's like me saying, Daniel, the only thing we need to do, the guy that won on a board and wrote a book and got the greatest governor we ever had, why don't we go to Cuomo and ask him? I wonder if he would criticize Abbott. Yeah. I mean, but at the moment, I don't think he's in quite the position to do that.
He's got some troubles, and so does Newsom, who I think, I forget what the tweet was, but as soon as Abbott announced it, he commented on it, you know, unbelievably insane that he's doing this. Well, we'll see in 2 weeks. We'll see what Texas's number, we could be totally wrong. They could go through the roof. Past practice shows us that removing the mask mandate or putting in a mask mandate does absolutely nothing to change the trajectory of the virus curve. And we know that. We've been putting it up forever. But anyway, let's go past this next one. We can just stop by for a half a second. This is our local paper telling us that modified mask mandates will continue down here in Brazoria County, which is kind of depressing. But we'll see what happens. So I guess we finished with Abbott.
Well, yeah, there's one more on the mask, and then I have another item too. We wanted to talk about that Nature's article a little bit. But this is on Luci and our friend Bill Sardi, who's been on our program, who writes frequently on this subject. He's pointing out that when face mask guidelines are not found to be substantially scientifically the government resorts to social ostracism. Oh my goodness, that sounds serious.
Yeah.
And it probably is. And that's exactly, that's where the cancel culture comes out. So they say, we'll just embarrass the living daylights out of these people. So once again, it's an admission of failure. So along with the money, maybe the money is going to be spent to organize social ostracism and join up with those who love social ostracism. So that's just another tool to undermine the solution to our problem and pointing out the creation of these problems. And that is overblown and oversized governments and abuse of power, and also a condition where the people forget about what true liberty should be like, and should ask the question, why are we not seeking liberty over authoritarianism?
Yeah, and we're moving toward the Israel model, which is very depressing. It's also very depressing to see people like the Israelis and Jews from around the world who ended up in Israel falling for this idea that they have to wear a bracelet showing they've been vaccinated if they want to go to the store or go to a movie. I mean, they've kind of seen this movie before, and it doesn't end well. So, but I think that's where we're heading. But we do want to move on to one report because we've talked about the science, and this is a serious peer-reviewed journal, the journal Science, the journal Nature, and this is a new study that they just put out about the stay home, stay safe, stay-at-home policy, and the title is "Stay-at-Home Policy is a Case of Exemption Fallacy: An Internet-Based Ecological Study." Now, we don't want to go into the details because I've read part of it, Dr. Paul, and I'm not a scientist, and my eyes glazed over, so I, of course, skipped to some of the conclusions as best as I could. And I sent you this paragraph yesterday, this next one, because this is the operative paragraph, which is really, really very interesting. If we just click to that next clip, just go forward one if we can. In 98% of the comparisons using 87 different regions of the world, we found no evidence that the number of deaths per million is reduced by staying at home. In other words, stay home, stay safe is absolutely an empty slogan, a hollow slogan.
This is not brand new information because others have alluded to this, but they've limited it more. This is a more broad examination of a larger number of people, and it's dealing with deaths per states and this sort of thing, where if it's a narrow group. But it shows that compared to people dying, if you lock down your kids or anybody, just think of all these mistakes. And right now, in our local schools, that they're opening up. In the school districts are exempt from any pressure, from the government. So what they're doing is they're compelling the kids still to wear these masks to school, and they're the ones who are really safer than all these people. But here, this is the whole thing that indicates that there's a lot of worrying that's not done, a lot of mental anguish that goes on, and this is what we put up with in trying to get people to say go easy. And we've given these statistics out so often. The total death rate of all of society, even after you're positive, is less than 1/2 of 1%.
Yeah.
And of course we do recognize, and all the studies show that that the elderly are more vulnerable, but even those numbers aren't that bad, and it's usually because they have other illnesses too. But even then, it's in the 90s. I mean, these might be 94% do not die from it. So this is I think an important study. I think they're credible, and we need to spread the message.
But even as we trust the science, we look, this was just a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday, Harris County's page, their current threat level. Let's take a look. Stay home, stay safe doesn't work. We know this from the study. What is theirs? Code red in Harris County. Stay home, work safe, code red. Don't go outside. It just shows you it's just becoming a joke. I'm going to go through a couple real quick things. Let's look at the next one, because here's also Texas. And this is important. This is a gentleman who's kept a good eye on Texas. Old school Texas hospitalization analysis. Down 69.6% from January 11th peak. This is hospitalizations, statewide hospitalizations. Down 54% from 4 weeks ago, 22.8% from last week. Only 6.83% of the beds are being used by COVID-19 patients. The numbers for Texas, regardless of what CNN and everyone says, are very good. Let's look at the next one really quick, because here's just a couple of comparisons that are important. I saw this morning. The governor of Illinois says he's been following the science since March, and he disparaged other states for their policies. He even issued travel guidelines for places like Iowa and Wisconsin. The data clearly shows he was wrong. Lockdowns and mandates are not needed. And the blue line is Illinois actually did worse than Iowa and Wisconsin, which he was telling people to avoid. And there's the next one here. This is the same thing. We just show it over and over. Arkansas mandated masks on July 20th, while neighboring Oklahoma never did. They followed the exact same curves. You look at it, it's the exact same curve. And I think this is why, Dr. Paul, if we go to the next one, why we're starting to see this, the dam is breaking. Maryland, deep blue Maryland, is lifting the cap on dining, retail, and religious establishments. People are flipping out. Nobody wants to be the last person on the sinking ship. And I'm going to close finally. Let's skip the next one, because we'll talk about Newsom some other time. I'm going to close with a little lightheartedness, Dr. Paul, because we're getting a little heavy here. This is from the Babylon Bee, which we like very much. It's a picture of Abbott. You can reopen now. Governor Abbott shouts at a row of abandoned, dilapidated buildings. Anyway, a little bit of fun at the end.
Now they're going to reopen, and some places they'll say, this is a reason why the federal government does need these appropriations, just make sure we get the money to rebuild. And of course, that's been ongoing. The appropriations have been just huge, this past year or two. And it's always as an effort to compensate for the problems the government created. That has been so often the case. They look at the problems and wonder how it happens, and really it's the government itself is the problem. But people get really skittish. They get very frightened to say, well, government is supposed to take care of me, and yet there's a lot of people who understand something differently. But it's an organized effort. They're called lobbyists and group power. It's the opposite of what a republic should be. It is organized, pressure on there. It's dictatorship by the majority, because democracy is sacred in this country, and yet it's It's done by majority mob rule is what it is. The founders couldn't stand it. I just wish they'd have been more explicit and said, well, that would have been a prohibition. They shouldn't be allowed to do this, to have a dictatorship defining minority rights. And the people who scream the loudest for this democracy are the ones who want more stuff. And just think, some of the most evil things that people have ever experienced, including slavery, is done by a majority. So the majority is frequently in charge of the slavery. Today, there's the slavery that we're putting up with today is dictated to us by a majority who's been coerced and organized by special interest groups, including many, many business groups and banking groups, if not the largest group, that they get these laws passed and they come across, well, we'll take care of this and we'll pay more taxes and all, and yet they're dealing in billions and billions of dollars, and the more money they pass out, and they do pass out a lot of money, the worse it gets because they're rejecting common sense about economics. They pass out all this money, and they have this fallacy that passing out money is wealth. It isn't. It distorts wealth. It destroys the production effort. So their money's being passed out a lot, and the rich get richer and the poor get poorer and the people get less free. And there's an answer to that, and it's not complicated. People need to understand that a society that's based on individual rights that come from our Creator or in a natural way, is the solution to this. Not that government gave us this right, not this whole idea that as long as we have Fauci on our side, we're going to get a little bit of our freedom back again. That's nonsense. What we need to do is understand and get more people to promote the cause of liberty. Then I think we will have peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.